Hey guys, welcome back to Ripe Stories. In this video, a neighbor lit my daughter's wheelchair ramp on fire, claiming that disabled people are not allowed in the neighborhood. Let's dive right into the video. And to get into the mood of r/pro revenge stories, we will start with a story from r/traumatize them back, which is titled Sailor Did What Hot Sauce Could Not. So I was the recipient of the trauma here in the olden days when I was a child sometime last century, around the late 70s. I was a stubborn thumb sucker. The conversation is approximate. While I remember the event, I can only guess at what was actually said, but I've done my best. I mean that quite literally. My thumb was my comfort and no one could take it away from me. My parents tried bitterants and Tabasco, and I don't remember what else. I do remember sneaking a glass of water to bed and dunking my thumb in the water to deal with the Tabasco. Nothing they did would stop me. Even social stigma did not stop me. Looking back, it probably made it worse, as I sought comfort from being ridiculed. But then this happened. I was a Girl Scout brownie at the time, so probably around 6 or 7 years old, and our troop had the opportunity to tour a US Navy vessel. We lined up to go on the ship, carefully crossing the gangplank under the supervision of one of the sailors, standing on the ship side of the approach. As I crossed, thumb securely in my mouth, nervous about the crossing, the sailor helped me onto the ship, and then, "Young lady, if you don't stop sucking your thumb, it's gonna fall off." Following my eye roll at him, he held out his hand with only a nub where his thumb was supposed to be. "I speak from experience. I suggest you learn from my mistake." Y'all, that thumb came out, hand went behind my back, and my thumb wrapped up in a fist as I attempted to protect it. Also, the thumb sucking never happened again. And yeah guys, what can I say, this subreddit is just amazing. The next one is another story from r/traumatize them back, which is titled Think Twice Before You Judge Someone for Vaping. So this happened earlier today. I was at work outside on a smoke break. I vape. One of my coworkers came outside and took it upon herself to start lecturing me. "You know, vaping kills people, right? There's metal and other chemicals in vapes that are so bad for you. You should quit and look to God for guidance." She just kept going on and on about how badly I should quit. Now, I don't entirely disagree, but I find it rude to just comment on someone else's habits unsolicited like that. So I responded the best way I knew how. Well, there are a lot of worse things I could be doing right now instead of vaping. My mom got me hooked on drugs when I was a young teen, and I've been clean of fentanyl and other hard drugs for about 9 months now. Vaping helps me to do that, so right now it's one day and one thing at a time for me. This is all true, by the way. Her eyes grew so wide and she immediately apologized, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't know all of that." Well, I don't expect people to know. Maybe next time she will think twice before giving unsolicited advice. And now guys, we will move on to the title story, which is titled Neighbor Lit My Daughter's Wheelchair Ramp on Fire. English is not my first language, so please forgive any mistakes. I'm actually from the Czech Republic, so I'm guessing that the law here is a little different from other places. Well, with that out of the way, this is the story of how my neighbor tried to bully my daughter and paid a high price. To start with, my daughter uses a wheelchair. She always has, and according to every doctor we've talked to, she always will. However, she has never once complained about how unfair life is. She just keeps stubbornly moving forward and refuses to let her disability make her miserable. I could not possibly be proud of her. A few months ago, we decided to finally set up a wheelchair ramp on our property. We had not bothered before because there's a slightly longer path that she can take around the side of the garden to get in and out of the house, but I figured enough was enough. She should not need to waste her time taking the long way when we could just set up a ramp right next to the stairs so we could come and go together, side by side. I want to stress that this is definitely on our property. The stairs very much belong to me and the ramp was installed over an uninteresting patch of dirt. Nothing was destroyed to make room for them, not even a single flower, and even if it was, that choice would have been well within my rights. Anyway, this brings us to the main event. Just a few weeks after the ramp was installed, my neighbor showed up, ranting and demanding that we get rid of it. At first I thought they must have been joking. After all, they had been a bit rude and standoffish in the past, but he had not been this aggressive before. This time, however, he marched up to the front door and pounded on it until I answered. Looking back, I'm just glad that my daughter was not the one to greet him. If he had spoken to her the way he was shouting at me, I don't think I would have been able to control my temper. As it was, I was barely able to stay civil as he went on and on and on. Among other things, he was declaring that I was coddling my daughter and that she would be a parasite forever if I kept making things too easy for her. Apparently installing a ramp was the straw that broke the camel's back, in his mind, and now he could no longer hold back all his scathing criticism of my parenting. But that was just the tip of the iceberg here. After I asked him to get the hell off my property, he absolutely exploded and started yelling about how disabled people were not even allowed to live in this neighborhood. I guess once he realized that pretending to care about her future was not gonna sway me, he just completely dropped the mask and let me see what he really thought. Basically, that disabled people did not deserve to live in regular neighborhoods with everyone else. I could not stop myself from asking where the hell my daughter was supposed to live if not here, and to that he just sneered and said that she could go live with all the other invalids so their nurses could keep them away from polite society. I'm not particularly proud of how I responded to that, but I would just say that my neighbor turned tail and ran off before anything truly regrettable could happen. I'm not sure how much of it my daughter heard, but she definitely caught the end of it, so I just spent the rest of the day reassuring her that everything was fine and treating her to her favorite meal. I figured if I just ignored my neighbor, then he would stay away. Well, unfortunately, it turns out I was dead wrong here. The very next day I went out to run some errands, and when I got home, I found a smoking mess in my front yard. That's right, the guy went and set the ramp on fire. Saying that I was furious does not even begin to cover it. We were extremely lucky that the fire had not spread and done any more serious damage. As it was, the wood of the ramp was completely ruined and I would need to replace everything. Possibly with stone the next time so it would be less flammable. As soon as I was sure the fire was completely out, I ran inside and checked to make sure my daughter was safe. It turns out she had been listening to music, so she had not even heard whatever had happened out front. The moment I was sure that she was fine, all that panic turned right into furious anger. I knew exactly who was responsible for this, and I was not gonna let him get away with petty intimidation tactics. I'd already ignored him once and look how that turned out. Well, this time I immediately called the police and reported what had happened. I told them my neighbor was harassing my daughter and had set a fire on my property. At the time, I was not sure if anything would come of it. I was obviously furious and wanted to see him pay, but I also recognized that there probably was not much evidence that he was actually responsible for this. If he claimed that he had no idea about any fire, then he could turn it into a he said she said situation. Fortunately, my neighbor was not nearly as calm and collected as he might have been. I had not really thought about how exactly he might have caused the fire, so I had not really thought about whether there would be much physical evidence to find. As it turned out, when the police arrived at his house, they happened to find him desperately trying to get rid of some gasoline cans. But the police did not arrive alone, the firefighters came as well, which surprised me at first but made sense in hindsight. After all, they had no way of knowing that the fire was completely extinguished, so they had to check for themselves. And of course, they also happened to be pretty familiar with fires, so they took one look at the scene and said that it was pretty unlikely this started naturally. And on top of that, there was also an ambulance just in case. All in all, it seemed like a lot of overkill, and I was a little irrationally worried that it might have seemed like I was wasting their time and resources on a minor issue. Or at least it would have seemed like that if my neighbor did not immediately panic and start running his mouth, calling my daughter every name in the book and saying that she should have just been locked up. My worries vanished instantly, and I only held back from pummeling the man's face because just about every emergency responder looked equally disgusted by his outburst. The rest of the day was honestly a bit of a blur. The firefighters departed once they checked out the fire and confirmed that accelerant was definitely used here. They also left some ominous comments about how very illegal arson was, especially on residential property where minors were living. The EMTs, I think that's the term in English, came in to check on my daughter and make sure that she was alright. It broke my heart to see her so shaken up by this mess, but she handled it courageously. When the EMTs left, we also caught a glimpse of our neighbor being shoved into the back of a police car and then driven away. I was still a little worried that he might just be let out with a slap on the wrist or something, so I contacted the city and after talking to a few different departments discovered that he was going to be held with a pretty serious list of charges. I figured it would just be arson and maybe harassment, but there were at least half a dozen more based on the fact that my daughter was both a minor and disabled. That did make me feel a little better, but there was still one thing gnawing away at me. If our neighbor felt that way for a long time and finally snapped, did that mean that there were other neighbors that shared the same unkind thoughts about my daughter? The possibility had never occurred to me before, but after the fire I could not get it out of my head. I did not want to alarm her too much, so I asked a few general questions about whether anyone in the neighborhood treated her like this before, but she was just as confused as I was. Those were the sorts of worries swirling around in my head when the doorbell rang. First one, then two, then three neighbors dropped by, all checking to make sure we were alright and bringing us food. Words cannot express how shocked and thankful I was for this wave of support. Not everyone dropped by, of course, but nearly everyone sent their wishes for our good health. Some sent letters in mail, and there was an outpouring of collective sympathy on social media, and a few gave us phone calls just to make sure we were doing alright. Also, a very large portion made it clear that they were perfectly willing to testify in legal matters if it came to that. I had not realized just how much the villain of this story had frustrated the rest of the community before the fire, but now I understand that he had secretly been complaining about my daughter to anyone who would listen, hoping to find a sympathetic ear. As far as I can tell, he did not find a single one. In fact, I think he angered everyone else so much that they were eager for an opportunity to put him in his place. More than one of my neighbors asked about what sort of lawsuit I was gonna file against the arsonist, and at first I did not have an answer and thought that maybe the criminal case would be more than enough punishment, but as more and more of our neighbors confided just how much poison he had been spreading, I stopped feeling any pity at all towards the man. Some of our neighbors even went so far as to help me find a lawyer that could help with this kind of case. Once we got in touch, they pretty much handled everything and I just had to answer some questions. My daughter gave a few statements as well, which she didn't have to do, but she volunteered because she wanted to stand up for herself. There are no words for how proud I am of her. I was a bit worried about him being released and having him live in the neighborhood again, but that worked itself out too. Not only did he get formally charged and have to face down some prison time, but he was also issued a sort of restraining order that meant he could not live anywhere near my daughter again. The police also said they were going to keep an eye on him later and take any new reports of him discriminating against the disabled very seriously. The civil suit was also much more successful than I suspected. I thought our neighbor was a man of meager means, but apparently he had inherited a sizable amount from a deceased relative, which meant that he was not gonna become homeless if we went after the sorts of damages that our lawyer recommended. Both cases were helped along substantially by his complete inability to keep his mouth shut. Once he realized that he was in deep trouble, he started yelling about how this was a conspiracy to ruin his life. I don't think he even mentioned my daughter, he just thought that disabled people in general were jealous of him and trying to make him miserable. He even accused one of the judges of being disabled and therefore being biased against him. Needless to say, the judge was not pleased by that strategy. The cherry on top is that we actually used the money from the settlement to build a much nicer ramp for my daughter and then donated the rest to a project that wanted to make public spaces more accessible for wheelchairs. I really wish I could have seen the look on my neighbor's face when he found out about that. And yeah guys, if you enjoyed these stories about crazy neighbors getting what they deserve, please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments because they help me tremendously. The next one is titled, I wore a suit to work and got my supervisor soft demoted. Ever since I started at my job a few months ago, my supervisor, we will call him Josh, has been micromanaging me. When I am the subject of criticism, which is often, I try to give him the benefit of the doubt and ask him to clarify, what are your expectations, what specifically should I have done differently, and Josh's responses are always vague, often something to the effect of, just do it better. I even had a meeting with Josh and HR to address this, but to no avail. Well, yesterday, Josh comes to my desk to tell me that I need to dress better. Now, I work at a small company and the vibe is unusually casual. A not insignificant number of people come to work wearing jeans, hoodies, t-shirts and/or baseball caps. I have never worn a hat to work and I make a point of wearing a button-up shirt with a collar every day. This particular day, I was wearing a long-sleeve button-up flannel, chino pants and Adidas Gazelles. Other days, I wear loafers and dress shirts that are tucked in. So I asked Josh to clarify, should I be wearing dress shoes, dress shirt tucked in? What specifically do you want me to change? Josh tells me I just need to dress better and that I should talk to HR for clarification. So I go into HR and ask what's the dress code. I get a standard answer. Pants, closed-toed shows, no sleeveless shirts, etc. And I ask that I have ever worn anything to work that poses a problem. HR says no, you're fine. Because I am mad and because my repeated efforts to resolve this kind of problem had gone unheeded, I decided to be petty. The next day, today, I showed up to work in a full suit. It's one I keep for events like weddings, so it's fitted and I look really sharp in it. It's also wildly and conspicuously overdressed for the office I work in. I had several interactions with people coming to my desk to comment on my outfit and ask what the occasion was. When anyone asked, only if they asked, I told them I'd been told to dress better. This was always met with disbelief and incredulity. 2 people even said they liked the way that I dress normally. When anyone asked me who the order came from, again, only if they asked, I told them it came from Josh. I was expecting to pull my little stunt for a week just to prove a point and then go back to wearing what I had been wearing before. Well, word got around the office fast, apparently because the CEO, Josh's direct boss, came to my desk later in the day to tell me I would be reporting to him now and that he would be having a talk with Josh about this and other issues. It's important to note that I was Josh's only underling, so he effectively went from being a supervisor to just a regular employee. I'm on a bit of a high now. I think I'm going to come into work tomorrow wearing a different one of my flannels. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Most of the people reading this will have heard that it can be tough to grow up with siblings. Some might even have heard that it can be amazing to grow up with siblings. I suppose it all really depends on who the parents are and how they treat their children. My parents were not exactly the best. I've always known that they were disappointed that their first child, me, was a boy, as they had really hoped for a girl, so when my sister was born a couple years later, they were over the moon and showered all their love and affection on her, and I became a second-class citizen, so to say. Obviously, I never really noticed this being a toddler and all, but a few years went by and something finally clicked when I was having my 6th birthday and my parents insisted that my sister got to blow out my candles as she was getting very upset. I thought that it should not matter as it was my birthday and not hers. I did not understand what was going on. I know now though, it was favoritism. Soon my birthdays practically became my sister's 2nd birthday, as our parents would even go so far as to buy her presents, let her invite her friends to my party. By the time I was 10, I might as well not have had a birthday to begin with. It was not just birthdays either, but everything I did. All my accomplishments somehow meant that my sister got all the love and praise instead. All the great things I did was overshadowed by my sister in some shape or form. When my school year went on the annual trip for my year, my parents booked a holiday and took my sister to Hawaii. When I would go to the next state over to play in a basketball competition, they would take my sister to the city to watch the Timberwolves play. Whenever I would get praised for doing great in my grades, my sister would get even more praise for her mediocre grades. Unsurprisingly, my sister developed a princess complex to rival all princess complexes. She was so selfish, she would have put any only child spoiled to within an inch of their lives to shame. She might as well have been the only child as far as the affection my parents showed me over her. Needless to say though, the very first opportunity I got to leave home, I was gone, and I'm pretty sure my parents did not even notice. If I could, I would have gone to a college on the other side of the country, but as it so happens, my parents had not saved up anywhere near enough money for me to go to any but the local community college, but I was lucky enough that a couple of my friends were also eager to leave home, so we pooled our resources and rented a nice enough place just off the college campus. It felt great to finally be out of that household where I could stretch out and be my own person without everything I do being undermined by my sister. I did not want to have to rely on my parents for anything, so I did all that I could to put myself in a financially stable position, and although investments don't seem like a great way to make a secure amount each month, if you're careful and listen to all the advice, you could easily make enough money to buy a house, which is exactly what I did when I finished college. I could not believe my luck. All the investments over time paid out, and while I did lose a bit of money at first, it all came around and was worth it in the end. Now don't get me wrong, this was no massive mansion in the posh part of town. There was nothing fancy about my first house. It was a cramped one-bedroom place that was practically everything in one room, but it had an upstairs for the bedroom and bathroom, and to me that felt enough like a house, and I was on the property ladder. Naturally, my parents found out about it. I don't even know how, as I had not spoken to them in months. I would call them up now and then when I left home just to check in and let them know that I was doing fine. I honestly don't think they cared that much, because as soon as the pleasantries were out of the way, they would then go on a massive tirade of what my sister had been up to, how her gymnastics were so good that she would be going to the Olympics soon, and so on. Again, I have no idea how they found out that I had bought a house not where I actually lived. They just turned up one Saturday afternoon and invited themselves in like they owned the place. Naturally, I was frustrated and already thinking of selling on and moving to a new place. They poked around my little home, muttered to one another, approving this or disproving that, making small affirmative noises to each other. Once they were done looking around, they just looked at one another and said, "This will do," and off they went. I tried to question them what they were even doing here, but they made some excuse about running late for an appointment and that they just wanted to see the house. It was very strange behavior and it bugged me for days afterwards. Things became clear the following weekend when they showed up again, this time with my sister in tow. Once again, I had not invited them in, they just helped themselves. For nearly an hour, my sister complained about how pokey the house was, that she had hoped for something a little more spacious, and when I demanded to know what was going on, they told me that it didn't concern me and that I should butt out. A few days after this visit, my parents call around once more and tell me that my sister is gonna move into my house and that I needed to vacate by the weekend, which by the way was only 3 days. I told them not a chance, and if any of them come near my home, I will get the police involved. They tell me to stop acting so selfish and just leave. The next couple weeks are tough as my parents are constantly hounding me to give up my home for my sister. They even go so far as to tell me that I'm the older brother, it's my responsibility to give up what I have to look after my young sister. I tell them in probably the least polite way I've ever spoken to my parents to go screw themselves and that I never wanted to hear from them again. I hoped the message would finally get through to them, but I was nowhere near that lucky. A couple days later, I come home from work to find all my stuff out on the front porch. The house was small, so it didn't have a yard, but a small balcony porch. There's a guy in the middle of changing the locks too. How my parents got into my house in the first place is beyond me. All I can think is that they must have broken a window and just climbed in. I find my parents in the kitchen, moving things about for my sister, and my sister up in the bedroom, unpacking her stuff. I'm so furious that I don't even say anything to them, I just walk outside and call the police. When they come, my parents don't even realize the situation they are in, and casually try to explain to the officer that I am their son and that the house belongs to them through me, to which they are giving it to my sister. I couldn't believe the gall of it all, as if this was just another Sunday to them. Once the officers were done talking to my parents and my sister, the officer sympathizes with me a little and asks me what I want to do about it. I ask him if I'm able to have them arrested for trespassing or something, to which the officer tells me that just because they are family, it doesn't mean that I cannot charge them with full-on breaking and entry, squatting, trespass, and a whole slew of other things. I had the biggest grin on my face and I said yes to absolutely everything and pressed charges and then laughed non-stop as I watched my mom, father, and sister get carted away in handcuffs. Finally, vindication. I obviously had to lawyer up as this was going all the way to a court hearing with all the crap my family tried to pull. To which I was able to dredge up a whole lifetime of neglect and abuse. The judge's words, not mine. The neglect I could agree with, but the abuse sounded a bit far, but who am I to argue with a federal judge? In the end, they were fined a huge amount of money that I used to upgrade myself to a 2-bed semi, and they had a lifelong restraining order. But the best thing of all is that I was able to emancipate myself from them. Now whenever anyone asks me about my family, I just tell them I lost my family when I was just a little boy. And before we end the video, we will read one last story from r/malicious compliance. This one is titled, "You're not paid to think." Okay, so I didn't. So a few years ago, I worked as a copywriter at a small PR agency run by a tyrant of a boss. Let's call her Marcy. She was all about control. One day during a strategy meeting, I pointed out a huge flaw in a campaign that could have cost our client major money. Her response? "You're not paid to think, you're paid to write what I tell you." Okay, cool, I got it. From that point on, I followed her instructions exactly. No suggestions, no edits, no heads up when things were obviously going sideways, just pure flawless compliance. Within 2 months, 2 major clients left over tone-deaf campaigns. One I had tried to fix but was explicitly told not to. Guess who got blamed? Yes, it was me. Guess who kept receipts? Also me. I forwarded my "just doing what you told me" email chain to HR, and it turns out this was not the first complaint. She was restructured out of the company 3 weeks later. And yeah guys, thank you for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.